Mike. Toronto. VK on the beat. Check. I'm in Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm from Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm in Toronto like we wanna get the city love. My city love me back for my city love.
Welcome to episode 1523 of Toronto Mic'd, proudly brought to you by Great Lakes Brewery, a fiercely independent craft brewery who believes in supporting communities, good times, and brewing amazing beer. Order online for free local home delivery in the GTA. Palma Pasta. Enjoy the taste of fresh, homemade Italian pasta and entrees from Palma Pasta in Mississauga and Oakville. The Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team, the best baseball in the city outside the Dome. Join me August 4th. I'm at Christie Pitts recording live at 2 p.m. Drop by. Say hi. RecycleMyElectronics.ca. Committing to our planet's future means properly recycling our electronics of the past. And Ridley Funeral Home. Pillars of the community since 1921. Today, making his highly anticipated Toronto Mike debut. And they said it would never happen. It's Robert Fisher. Welcome, Robert.
Oh, great to be here. As an old friend of mine, Bob Ray, used to say after he was defeated in the 1990 election and he was invited to speak somewhere, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be anywhere. So it applies to me because we're approaching, an anniversary of my retirement from His Majesty's Royal Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
9 years, right?
Yeah, 2015. It seems like only yesterday.
A lot of ground to cover with you, but maybe before we dive into it, just getting you here was quite... So you don't live nearby?
No. Live at a lake in eastern Ontario. It's a Big Rideau Lake.
Oh.
But BRL also stands for Bob Ray Lake. Mr. Ray, the former premier, who I still call premier.
FOTM Premier Bob Ray.
Exactly, yes.
Proper title.
He and I happen to live on the same lake. He's
Wow.
He's on the rich side of the lake, of course. And just so we get this out of the way at the beginning of this,
Yeah.
Apropos of Mr. Ray's appearance recently on this program, I do not skinny dip.
I think the neighbors are grateful, right?
Yeah.
They're grateful. But
And
yeah.
as the great late Bill Davis used to say, I have no plans to have any plans to skinny dip in the Big Rideau.
Oh, you said Bill Davis. We have to shout out Steve Bacon, who's listening right now. I think he's on a different lake, but he spends
Again,
his
more
summers.
money. I retired from an NGO basically. So
How did Bacon pull that off? Where he was a CBC guy, and then now he makes the big bucks at TVO. How did he pull that off?
Steve probably doesn't know this story, but I also applied for that job.
I love it.
Peter Herendorf actually took my letter, and it was under active consideration. And then, for some unknown reason, he was blown away by Steve Bacon. And
It's the chin, I think. He's got a prominent chin.
It could be the Frank Sinatra pocket puff. I'm not quite sure.
Do you like Frank Sinatra?
I love Frank Sinatra.
Okay, this is all about Bacon today. You didn't know that, right, Robert? I'm going to get the living legend Robert Fisher in the basement for 90 minutes on Steve Bacon.
On Steve Bacon. It was worth the 4-hour drive to get here.
Okay, yeah, that's where we are. How difficult it was to get you here. So this is the third time I had the name Robert Fisher in the Toronto Mic'd recording calendar. And we don't need to go into details, but you had good excuses for not being here. You had to postpone the first two times.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've always been very honest with my listeners. I'll be honest with yours. I had a health scare. We were potentially looking at some esophageal cancer.
Oh, no.
And it was a pretty scary time through the spring of this year. But tests and probes and all kinds of stuff. And at the end of it all, they don't know what it was, but it isn't esophageal cancer.
That is fantastic news. That's great news. I feel like rewarding you for the news by sending you home with some gifts. But I'm glad the health scare was a false alarm.
Yeah, it was a scary time. I don't try to underestimate at all. And for people who, I've known former colleagues who went through, throat cancer, things like that. It's a very, very difficult time to come because... one of your sponsors is a funeral home.
Right.
And at 76, you have to start thinking.
Well, listen, 76 is one thing. My dear friend, passed away from esophageal cancer at the age of 32. So now, I'm glad you got the clean bill of health there. You look great. It's
Well,
the
I
first time we've
box.
met.
I box 3 times a week.
Is that right?
Yeah.
You box Bob Ray?
Well, for charity, perhaps.
Okay, so tell me, when did you get into boxing?
Oh, about shortly after I retired. When I retired, the staff people I worked with wanted to know from my wife what would Robert like as a going away gift, and she said, "Oh, a Pilates course." And people looked at me and said, "I hope you get the bottle of scotch with that." So I did Pilates and I did some exercise locally, and then it just wasn't kind of meeting the needs, So I went to boxing.
Wow. I mean, do people look at you and think this guy must be a boxer? Evander Holyfield, Mike Tyson, Robert Fisher.
I'm the great white hope at 76.
Well, shout out to George Chuvalo, who's still with us.
George. I mean, as a kid, I watched those black and white fights, right? Just amazing. The point I should make about the boxing, though, is that it's a program ostensibly designed for people with Parkinson's disease. My wife has had Parkinson's for 18 years. She started the program in Smiths Falls, which is one of the nearest big communities.
Right.
And I was sort of grandfathered in. I could be in because I was a partner of somebody.
Okay.
And it's been great. It's absolutely amazing. And you can take out the frustrations, the producers' faces who appear on those boxing bobs as cross jab.
I'm hoping during this chat here, and by the way, I've decided we're chatting for 4 hours. I hope that's okay with you.
Sure.
But we are going to drop some names and get some stories here. But the case, the health scare explains your first postponement. And again, thank goodness you're not going to be shouting out Ridley Funeral Home anytime too soon, okay? By the way, Ridley Funeral Home, Robert, wants you to have the famous Ridley Funeral Home measuring tape that's going to take home with
you. Thank you. There's swag with this
There's
show.
more swag coming, but first I want to say your second time you were in the calendar, a car problem? Is that right?
We somebody I know and love very dearly left the sunroof of the electric car open.
Oh, that's not good.
And it kind of floated away the electrical system, but it all turned out to be okay. It's in your driveway now.
So that's another false, because that's another false alarm. We don't need Ridley Funeral Home there either. But and then today you're a little late because you had a mild car issue maybe on your way here.
Yeah, it went through some, I would say, fender deep water.
It's nuts, right?
Oh, it is. It's
crazy.
The city
can't handle a lot of rain in a short period of time. It just floods. It happens all the time in this.
It brought me back actually to a time when I was still working. And there was a late afternoon flood in Toronto. This is a number of years ago. And at the last minute, at 6:28, the producer, in her wisdom, said, "We're going live with a special about the situation," because there was.
I remember this one. Yeah, this was a big one.
Remember the lawyer who's
that lawyer sent me a cease and desist once for episodes of Toronto Mic'd about TV Ontario.
Oh.
No, actually, sorry, not about TV Ontario. I got to correct myself. I'll fix it in post. About Jazz FM. So I did a series of episodes with people at Jazz FM, and there were issues. And this very lawyer whose car was flooded sent me this cease and desist.
And you just left it. It was a Mercedes
he just left it.
Something,
Ferrari or something.
Ferrari, just in the. But one of the things that happened was that all of a sudden we are in the studio and there is no script. There is nothing prepared.
Right.
And people, very much like Broadcast News, the movie, which is my favorite movie. I found it a serious movie. A lot of people thought it was a comedy, where they're feeding information.
Well, they filmed that in Agincourt, right?
At what is CFTO, I think.
I think Tom Gibney's in that.
Ah.
I think so, but keep going. This is a great movie.
So we just start to talk. And talk, and then they feed me stuff, as in the movie, it's an F-18, it drops 2 bombs. Blah, blah.
Right.
So they're saying, okay, stand by. Oh, we've got Rob Ford on the phone. Oh, Mr. Mayor, welcome. Well, I've been out talking to the people of Etobicoke, and I've been clearing sewers and all that sort of stuff. And that we filled with that, and then one interview begat another and another, and so we ended up filling about 2.5 hours of airtime.
You can always kick out the flood jams. When worse comes to worse, let's just kick out the flood jams.
So today reminds me of that moment where the water was just incredible.
Well, listen, Robert, I'm really glad we got to make this happen. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Now, a note came in from T.Resident when I went on the app formerly known as Twitter and said Robert Fisher is going to finally make his Toronto Mic debut. And it's just simple. Robert is great. Looking forward to the episode. So thank you, T.Resident.
It's amazing what $20 will do.
Is that your burner account, T.Resident?
An e-transfer to, yes, exactly.
T.resident@gmail.com. Doug, I don't think it's Doug Ford, but Doug writes, I'm very interested in this. His father was the voice of CJSS Radio News in Cornwall.
Yes. Yep.
Carl Fisher?
Carl Fisher.
Morning News. And former BN executive Wayne Waldorf.
Yes.
And Mayor Gerald
Parisian.
So please translate all that for me.
My dad was in the army in the war. He was based in Montreal, so there wasn't a single Nazi sub that got past Lachine, thanks to Dad. He... We always say he went in 4F and came out A1. He had flat feet, so the infantry was out, so he was assigned to the Royal Canadian Ordnance Corps. But with that came so many benefits. I mean, he saw Jackie Robinson play for the Montreal Royals. He went to New York and saw Lily St-Cyr and her fan dancing. Something the family doesn't talk much about publicly.
I'm not even sure I know that name.
No? Well, you see, there's a generational thing happening here.
But Jackie Robinson, real quickly here, I recently did a Father's Day special, and it was about how Russ Taylor should be in the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame.
Yes.
Do you know Russ Taylor?
Know of him? Yes.
Know of him.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
But then in that episode, they do reveal that for a few games in 1972, Jackie Robinson called Expos games, like as the analyst for a few games. And I didn't realize because... Well, I wasn't born yet. That's why, Robert. But I didn't realize that same calendar year, Jackie passes away, 52 years old or something like that. Like I didn't I guess because I see photos of him and he looks older because he had diabetes and we didn't have as good a handle on it back then. But I didn't realize how young Jackie Robinson was when he passed and how very shortly before that he was calling Expos games.
No, I didn't know that. I mean, I worked in Montreal for 7 years. But just to finish the story about Dad,
of course.
He came out of the army, didn't know what he wanted to do. Yeah. So he went to what I think became Ryerson and took a radio course because there was only radio. And his teachers included Lorne Green.
Wow.
He came to lecture, the voice of doom from the CBC because he read the casualty lists for the younger listeners out there. And Bing Whitaker, who was another big, huge name from the 40s and 50s at CBC. So he applied for work and he found it at what was then CKSF Cornwall. Met my mother and the rest is history. It became CJSS and it didn't, small town radio didn't end necessarily well. He moved into television locally and that didn't end well. He sold some assurance, but in the last 5 years of his life before he died, he went back to reading the morning news on CJSS.
Wow.
So I sort of grew up around it.
It was in your blood.
It was, but it's funny. I didn't realize it. I always wanted to be an architect. But academically, I mean, let's be honest here. A 48 in math is not going to get me into the School of Architecture at U of T. And I had a wonderful teacher in Cornwall who said, "Why don't you go to see Gordy Higgins in the guidance room?" And so I met him, and he said, "You've been around this all your life. Why shouldn't you choose that as a career?" Because to back up a second, I was one of those people because of my age, and there's a lot of people listening who may have been in the same boat. I got streamed out of the arts and science side and put into science, technology, and trades, otherwise known as tech, where, the sort of woe-begotten students ended up.
Right.
I didn't, because my vice principal said to my parents, Robert could be a great welder.
Right.
Because I took the Schaub option in grade 9, because I didn't want Latin, music, or home economics.
Home ec, I remember this, yeah.
So, of course, meeting some young women in home ec, I really never thought about till this actual very moment. But, so, I built the coffee table and the lamp, and then from that, my vice principal, God bless his soul, decided that I couldn't move on in the arts stream, that I should, in fact, go to tech. But I hated it.
Right.
So Gordy said, look, why don't you go to Algonquin College, which is just starting in Ottawa. They have an 8-month journalism program. It's a great grounding. And it was. And from that, I started my first job, $55 a week, in June of 1967.
Okay, pause.
Yep.
Andrew Ward. Shout out to Andrew Ward, who was at TMLX 15, which was just a couple of weeks ago at Great Lakes Brewery. Since I said Great Lakes Brewery, Robert, that fresh craft beer from Great Lakes Brewery is going home with you.
Wow.
And because you're not at the CBC, you can accept all these gifts. That's a conversation for later.
I did once take an A&W root beer mug and was called on the carpet.
All right, I have had, I don't know if I need to name him, but a recent guest from CBC Radio who reads the news. I often listen to his CBC Radio news before I fall asleep, was not allowed to accept any gifts on Toronto Mike.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very recent episode. So you can.
Okay.
Okay, because you're retired. So you got the fresh beer.
Yep.
But back to Andrew Ward. He says, in 1967... you, Robert, were a cub reporter for CHW. I feel like I'm Brian Linehan now, the way I'm reading this, okay? In 1967, you were a cub reporter for CHWO Radio in Oakville. Mm-hmm. And one of your assignments was to go to a garden party in Port Credit to interview the Prime Minister.
Premier.
What? Sorry.
Well, he was Prime Minister, John Robarts.
Yeah, Premier, which is a typo by Andrew Ward. Andrew, you made me look bad. We're going to talk about this.
I think in fairness to Andrew, at the time, I think Mr. Robarts was known as the Prime Minister of Ontario. So,
okay, that was like the way they referred to it back then. Right, right. Okay, no, so Andrew, I apologize. You won't get the beads here. But what happened? So tell me that story for Andrew, and then, let's talk about Cub Reporter.
So keep in mind, Cub Reporter means I'm 18, okay? There's an election campaign in Ontario. I hear about a garden party that had people in Oakville had invited the then Premier Prime Minister Robarts to go to. And I thought, well, I should go and get an interview. I mean, I never thought there'd be a problem. And in those days, there was no security. There was no big media throng. I was going to say thong. That's another story I can tell you about.
You're back to the lake now with our friend Bob Ray.
Bob Ray.
Okay.
So I went in. I asked the woman whose home was host. I said, could I possibly... a couple of moments with Mr. Robarts. And she said, oh, I'm sure he'll want to talk to you. And so he was talking to me, and he, this guy was a handsome dude, tanned, mustache, the navy blue suit, the white shirt. I mean, he was the sort of George Clooney of Ontario politics in that era and in the late 60s. And so I said, excuse me, Premier, I wonder if I could have a moment of your time. And he turned around and he looked at me, and I hope I can do this in this complete fashion without costing you a license renewal. He turned around and he said, who are you? And I said, I'm Bob Fisher from CHWO, and I'd like an interview. And he looked at me up and down and he said, fuck off, kid. And I didn't have the tape rolling.
Oh.
Probably today, if that were to happen, I might have got the clip and we might have run it. But I was, 18. The man who had signed my high school graduation certificate. I mean, oh my God,
that's wild!
It was
full F-bomb.
I once told that story to Mr. Davis, Bill Davis, and he took his pipe out and he very reasoned sort of response. He said, "Well, Robert, Mr. Robarts could be salty in his language." And that was so typical of Bill Davis.
And today we know Robarts from the library. I went to U of T, and I spent much time in that big, giant, scary library.
Yeah.
And we were always told, I don't know if it's an urban legend or not, but when I was going to U of T, and we're going back to the late 90s now, but that it was sinking. Like Robarts library, I don't know, an inch a year or something. They said that, I know, but if I do the math, I feel like we would have noticed this by now. This might not be true, but they said this library is so heavy, it is sinking into the ground. And a sad end for this. And two questions here. One is, do you have any idea when Prime Minister of Ontario became Premier? Do you have any?
I'm not sure. It may have been under Bill Davis. They may have scratched off the gold paint on the door on the second floor. I'm not quite certain.
But now I'm impressed by Andrew Ward properly saying to interview the Prime Minister, which I thought was a typo, and realized Andrew Ward he's playing 3D chess and we're just playing checkers over here. He knew exactly in 1967 was the Prime Minister.
You've got a good researcher.
Yeah, he did a great job. But sad end for Robarts. It
was a very difficult time at Queen's Park. Mr. Davis had took his death by suicide, quite frankly.
Right.
Very hard. And I only realized in hindsight why there was such emotion there. Mr. Davis's first wife died of cancer, and he was left with 4 children, and probably the prospect of not continuing his political career. And John Robarts, he was many things to many people. Chief of the CEO of the board at Queen's Park, blah blah blah, whatever. He is said to have called Mr. Davis in and said, "Look, we will make this happen. We will make sure that you can stay in cabinet, be education minister, and be successful," and God knows he was. And we'll somehow accommodate, but we don't want you to leave. And of course, by 1971, he was leader of the party and premier. Right. Yeah. But if it hadn't been for Robarts' interjection, my guessing is Bill Davis may have ended up running a marina on Georgian Bay or something. I don't know.
So that's your first, I guess, as a member of the, news media, at least, that was your first interaction with an Ontario premier. No. And have you had interactions with Doug Ford? Like, I'm wondering, can you run the whole string here?
Well, I was going to say, sadly, I've not had interactions with. So my premiers were Davis, Frank Miller,
okay,
David Peterson,
right,
Bob Rae, 1990, the tumultuous, upheaval. Bob Rae to Mike Harris. Mike Harris to Ernie Eves to Dalton McGuinty, Kathleen Wynne, and my ninth premier would be Doug Ford. But I was pretty much out of the business.
You were gone 9 years ago this month.
Yeah,
which we'll get to here in our chronological. Quick update from the live stream, live.torontomike.com. I popped over, and Canada Kev is there, and he says your Rob Ford impression is excellent. So, keep up the Rob Ford impressions. People are digging it. And Andrew Ward happens to be on the live stream hearing you answer his question. And he says, that was fucking awesome. He loved the story that resulted from his.
Hearing that particular word, there was a bit of a foofara at CBC about a week ago. They ran some music at the end of, I think, the 8 o'clock edition of World Report that ended with a 4-letter word. And the newsreader happens to be from the 1990s, and she told the host of CBC Ottawa, my 1990 ears were on. I didn't really hear the word.
Right.
But I suspect that a lot of CBC listeners did, and probably it's not the word that I wanted to hear.
Don't tell Pierre Poilievre. He might cut funding to the CBC.
I know. It's. I think it would be. Look, I know I have the CBC tattoo still on me, even though I've been gone for so long. But I had a wonderful experience at CBC. I had a wonderful 12 years at Global till they decided I was too old and too expensive.
Hold that fire, because we're going off at some point. We're talking about Global and Chorus and all this is coming up soon. But because we're going to walk through this, but I am curious though. As a former, you said tattooed still on your heart, your CBC. I wore this shirt for you.
Oh, that's wonderful.
My CBC Radio.
I was almost around for that particular logo.
That logo?
Yeah.
Almost there. So we're going to walk through this. I'm going to give you a couple of gifts here quick, but I wonder, what do you think about the future of your former colleagues and others at the CBC that if you trust the polls, the next government will be formed by the Conservative Party of Canada, and the leader has promised he will defund the CBC.
And turn the headquarters downtown at John and Front into social housing. I think the chances of that are slim. I think that, look, where I live now on the Bob Rae Lake, or BLR, Big Rito Lake, I don't usually tell people what I did in my previous life. And for good reason, because when people find out, a lot of my neighbors, their first response is, you worked at the Communist Broadcasting Corporation.
That's such a shame.
And, I think, boy, look, the stuff we have done for people in this country and united the country. And look, it's not perfect. And from my point of view, after being retired for 9 years, it's more imperfect. The quality is just not what I think it ought to be. But that's a personal thing. And it's probably an age thing for me, because when I went there, it was a big deal. And you just as when I went to CJD in Montreal, there's a esprit de corps. There's a level of performance that is expected, not every day, but every newscast. And when I missed the boat on that newscast, at CBC Radio, when I had 13 years there after I was dismissed by Global, it really bothered me. Whereas some of my younger colleagues, it was, so the 9 o'clock was screwed up. I'll get it back at 10 or maybe 11, or maybe I'll never get it back, But for me, it was important to be good and accurate, correct in my language, every single time that theme music started on the hour.
You had high standards for yourself.
Well, we all did. I think of one of the things that I've been so grateful for, Mike, is I've been looking back as I've been encouraged by my wife, particularly, to write a book. Bob Rae also was one of those. And in that, I've had a chance to kind of go back over the colleagues that I had, the people I worked with at CBC, And at Global, for example, outstanding, other colleague reporters, anchors, editors, camera people. I mean, the guy and the floor director in the studio, people just exceptional. And all through my time at CBC, both as a television reporter, first at the National, then local CBC. My first assignment there was the Mississauga train derailment. And then leaving CBC Television to go to Global TV. Great chances to work with some extraordinary people.
Is this stop in Montreal before you take the job at CBC Television?
Oh, yeah. It was, I started in Montreal in October 1970. That may ring a bell with some people. I started a week before James Cross was kidnapped by the Fédération Libération de Québec, FLQ. And I was on the desk on the Saturday night that my news director, it was a Jewish holiday, and he is Jewish, and he had to get special dispensation from his rabbi to drive his mobile car, okay? He's supposed to walk to and from synagogue.
Right.
And Sid Margulies, a name that many ex-Montrealers would remember, came into the newsroom and he said, "So Fisher, what's going on?" I said, "Well, it's actually very quiet." And then all of a sudden, the police radio at the desk just blurted out this address in Longueuil on the South Shore of Montreal. And Margulies, an outstanding reporter, said, "My God, that's the address of Pierre Laporte. He's been kidnapped.
Wow.
Get into the studio and do the bulletin." So then it all unfolded, and I was on the night. Sadly, his body was found at St. Hubert Air Base, but it was an incredible experience. Remember, I came from Hamilton to Montreal, where on King Street, a 2-car accident with probably breaking news. No pun intended.
Right. Right.
And then to go into a political kidnapping. I was, this kid, 20 plus years old, filing to NBC Radio in Washington and all over the place, because it was just a huge story, but a great learning experience, just amazing.
So, okay, because when we last left you as the Cub reporter being told to F off in Oakville, so to get this down here, Robert.
Okay. So the
Oakville?
The path is Oakville. Mm-hmm. After a year, I went to CHAM in Hamilton, became municipal affairs reporter. Vic Copps, Sheila Copps' dad, was the mayor of Hamilton. Terrific guy, taught me so much about municipal politics. It was like getting an undergraduate degree in municipal politics. From Hamilton, because that station was owned by Ted Rogers, and he decided there had to be cutbacks. I met him many years later and said, "Oh, Mr. Rogers, great to meet you. You fired me once in 1969. And he was with John Tory at the time, and Tory, the blood drained out of his head. And he said, I think we'll go this way, Mr. Rogers. And he quickly took me away. But and when Larry Grossman was filling in on the morning show on CHFI, yet no less. But so then from Hamilton, another station in Hamilton, 1050 CKOC, the Busy Bee. This weekend in Cayuga, Big Daddy Garland. We had to do these stupid things for the drag races. It just was so embarrassing. I spent a few months there, and then a guy named Don Johnston, who was news director at CHML, eventually what used to be CFRB, he was called by Margulies, and Margulies said, "I'm looking for a young reporter, news anchor," and Don said, "I know exactly who you're looking for." So he recommended me to Sid, and I spent 7 wonderful years there, including a year as a news director of Montreal's leading English language radio station.
Okay, now I want to ask you, what were your jams? Like, what music in the 70s particularly would you have been listening to? Would you still be listening to Frank Sinatra?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I mean, my life was pretty much consumed with news.
Right.
I never was a DJ. I think I had one.
But you have the pipes for it. I'm listening in the headphones and I'm wondering, did you sound like this when you were in your early 20s?
No, I didn't. Actually,
you sounded like me.
Yeah, I have an audition tape at home. It's a reel-to-reel thing. And it was the first audition tape that I sent out. And it's like, oh my God, it couldn't possibly be me. But over time, the gravitas sort of grows into the throat, and you're off to the races.
Any darts involved, cigarettes or whiskey?
No. Although I do remember, from the October crisis, we were a block away in those days, a mountain in St. Catherine Street in Montreal, block away from Winston Churchill Pub, which was a watering hole for, all kinds of people, Mordecai Richler and you name it, they were there. And one Sunday night, all of a sudden, this person from the Winston Churchill came over with this gigantic bottle of Cutty Sark. It was one of those promotion things.
Right.
It was about 3 feet tall, like a real ball, but, I don't almost hit your ceiling here. I'm sorry.
You could hit the ceiling.
I'm taller than I remember. And they plunked in the middle of the newsroom table and said, if anybody needs a drink during this crisis, help us out. And not once did anybody ever, get to the point where they shouldn't be on the radio.
Okay, well, that's great restraint showing there. I don't no Great Lakes beer there to tempt everybody. All right, so you're in Montreal.
There should have been. Let me just add, there should have been Great Lakes beer available, right?
See, you're good at this. Now that you're not at the CBC, you can be a shill. You can quickly, Gare, because I'm going to get this out of the way because it's going to be rocking and rolling all the rest of the way. Yep. Palma Pasta did send over a delicious lasagna for you. It's in my freezer right now. They make authentic Italian food, and you buy it here in Oakville and Mississauga. Go to palmapasta.com, but they fed us all at TMLX 15, and everybody loved it. So Mike Apple sent me a note yesterday to say he had made a trip to Palma's. He lives on the other side of the city. He made a trip to Palma's Kitchen to load up because his kids demand it now. Okay, so you're bringing home that lasagna with you.
Better than bringing home the bacon.
Well, they probably have bacon. And,
probably bacon, yeah.
But not in that particular lasagna. One last gift here before we move on. Here in Toronto, we have a semi-pro baseball team called the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yep.
And they play at Christie Pitts. Have you ever caught a Toronto Maple Leafs team?
I was looking at the book and saying, my God, in the time I was in Toronto, which was a lifetime, I never went to Christie Pitts to see the Leafs play.
Well, it's worth the drive.
Yeah.
Although maybe not on a day like today, but they're absolutely full value, no ticket required. You can drink now in the park without worrying about breaking any laws. They got great food. It's a great spirit there. So that book you have is the history of Toronto Maple Leafs baseball. And I just want to remind everybody that this is just high caliber, entertaining baseball in a great environment here in the city. Christie and Bloor, Christie Pitts, we want to fill the hill. And I will be there recording live on August 4th at 2 p.m. And I'm scheduled to throw out the first pitch, Robert.
I was going to say, I was going to be able to throw out the first Tory. But,
oh, man. You missed your calling, too. Yuck Yucks, SCTV, you could have been.
One of the things, it's interesting you mentioned that because I'm a pretty serious guy. And every once in a while, sort of the humor comes out, and it may have come out in a news story, for example, or some juxtaposition or whatever. And people used to say, why can't you be funnier all the time? And
right.
My response usually was, well, this isn't funny. This is important. It's serious. So but. No,
you got to be a serious news guy. I know that timbre when I hear it in the headphones. This guy's delivering serious news, but the fact you have a sense of humor is fun to learn. I think a lot of CBC heads are going to be listening, and they did not realize Robert Fisher was that funny. So.
Well, I had a wonderful goodbye email from the then vice president of CBC, and she said that it's funny how things go around. I'd actually met this woman. One of the things I was involved in, Mike, at legislature for many, many years, and even currently, was the Ontario Leadership Intern Program, OLIP, where you bring in university students for a year. They get paid. They work 6 months for an opposition member and 6 months for a government member, and they're amazing young people. The current group I did not get a chance to speak with because of the health issues.
Right.
But, I've seen, I think, 39 groups, so that's 39 years of involvement. And one of the people turned out to be the vice president of the CBC many, many years later. And she said, I always remembered you coming to talk to our group. And I thought, boy, that was a worthwhile stop. And she mentioned the sense of humor. So,
you need it, right? Like, life is so serious. There's real news happening, serious things happening, and you need to have that release. You need to be able to laugh, or, it's too much.
I hate to sort of prolong the Bob Ray stories, but I think that one of the things that set Mr. Ray apart in his presentation, both in opposition and in government, was his sense of humor. To really sort of take the temperature down. That's the new expression now. Take the temperature down, says Joe Biden, and my God, it seems to be going the other way, which is quite frankly, maybe you want to talk about this, a very concerning situation.
Well, what I'm looking forward to is that we're going to meander. We're going to talk about everything, and we'll walk through your career because I got to get to the CBC here now, and then we really do need to talk about your departure from Global TV. Okay, I need the real talk there. But absolutely, I would be very interested in your take on what's happening with this has been quite the weekend, and I mean, an attempted assassination, and now it seems like there's a fear to criticize Donald Trump following this assassination, which to me, it's as a newsman, I'd be interested in your take on that. I'd be interested in your thoughts on all of this.
Well, when I heard the news, it was a shock, but not surprising.
Right.
You know, the fact that he gave $10 to the Democratic Party does not make him.
You know, I heard that might not even be him. Like, that might
it could have been
be
somebody else. But you know, he's 20-year-old so-called registered Republican in the United States with a gun.
Right.
And you know, one of the things that has always been around my life, following premiers, is security. Right. You know, the premiers travel, except for the current one sometimes who sneaks out in his pickup truck.
He's at his cottage right now.
Yeah, he is at his cottage right now. Somebody said they spotted him in a white van on the 427 on Wednesday morning. A Deca TRO van. Yeah, the company has an arm's length, except he drives their vehicles relationship. But anyway, that's another story.
We could do several hours on the greasiness of this particular.
So there should be security, right? I mean, and no premier, no prime minister in this day and age is going to go anywhere, particularly now, without lots of security. And so for me as a journalist, my questions are, okay, so Mr. Trump survived. He's got a nick in his ear. It could have been a bite from Mike Tyson, but it turned out to be a fragment of a bullet, okay?
We mentioned Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson earlier in this episode.
I know. You see how it all sort of...
I love it. I'm connected.
And this is not planned, right? We don't
even... In fact, I'll just let the listenership know. I didn't even want to know how you're doing. You were soaking wet at the door. I said, watch your head and get on the mic.
Did I remind you of the former British Prime Minister coming in soaking wet? This actually is going better than his election.
That's right. Okay, but back to your story, because I do want to ask you about former leaders as well.
Yeah.
But
so you don't say no to your security, because quite frankly, even for journalists, there are people out there who say and threaten lots of difficult things. In my career, I've had the death threats. I was punched and pushed in a grocery store after the 2015 election.
Wow.
By a gentleman who, pardon me, was, I made a mistake on election night. Mm-hmm. I had said in agreement with one of our anchors that Kathleen Wynne had made a lifestyle choice.
Oh.
I tell you, if I could take that back, Mike, right. I would just, and it caused an awful upset to the point where even though the CBC said, you don't have to apologize, the next morning with Matt Galloway, I asked for extra time after the analysis to say, look, I want to apologize to people, and not one of those political, if anybody was offended. I knew people were offended, and I had screwed up. And that bothered me to no end, and even thinking about it now gets the blood boiling.
Is it just the phrasing you used, that it's like a choice? That she one day decided I will be gay.
Exactly. And I've had gay friends who said to me, they heard that and it didn't mean anything, because sometimes in the parlance in the gay community, it comes up. It's a lifestyle thing, okay? But I knew it was wrong, and I knew it wasn't her. And so in a grocery store, this guy came up behind me and shoved me into a rack and then ran away. Wow. One of the first people to call me on the Friday morning after the election night, I picked up the phone at my desk and I heard, Robert, it's Kathleen Wynne. I just, I almost lost it, to tell you the truth. Mm. And she said, look, I know that was not your thinking. I know that's not you. And how much the apology was appreciated. And I just, it was kind of an amazing moment. And not that we didn't have our ups and downs. I wrote things about her that, boy, I'll tell you, people in her office, whew, you've upset the premier, Robert. Well, no kidding. I've upset about 8 other premiers along the path.
Now, Kathleen Wynne, so we talked about Bob Ray recently made a visit, but earlier this year, Kathleen Wynne made a visit. And I'm just wondering, as we talk about security detail and how it tied into what happened to Donald Trump, so can Doug Ford, does he have a security detail? Or no?
He does. Yep.
He does. Okay. Mm-hmm. What about when you're a former premier like Kathleen Wynne?
No.
Nothing. Okay.
No. I mean, there may be a panic button, so-called. In your,
we all have that on our phone, right? It's called 911.
Exactly. But there's more to it than that if you're a premier. And security around their home is always upgraded, and Mr. Ray would have told you that there was often an OPP launch outside his cottage.
But the reason I'm asking specifically, because those are two people where in this calendar year, they did exactly what you did, which is they parked in my driveway and they came to the side door and they knocked. And they came solo both. So Kathleen, not together, by the way. But that would be the episode. Okay. But Kathleen, but they would do that, I bet you. They're both, they both have great, I found them both to be very classy, very interesting, and very kind people.
Both, if I may say so, it sounds very political, but we're talking about, I guess, two parties that actually became one with Mr. Ray. He, as I said on Facebook, he was a dipper, then he was a liberal, then he was a dipper, and now we learned on Toronto Mike, he's a dipper again. He's dipping in the lake, skinny dipping.
Right,
but
right.
You do travel security for a reason. There are people out there that have mental health issues, that they see you, and you've got to be careful. Kathleen Wynne, everywhere she went, there were two OPP officers. If she ran in the morning, though this is a little interesting tidbit, the guys who used to protect her, they couldn't keep up with the running of the premier, so they had bicycles. And when they didn't have bikes, two women ran with the then premier of the day.
Very interesting. Yep. But it's interesting that once you're, because Kathleen Wynne was overwhelmingly, she did stay as an MPP for several years.
Very gutsy.
But
took a lot of abuse.
But so, I don't know if you know the answer, but when she's an MPP but no longer leader of the Liberal Party, I guess Stephen Del Duca, took over.
Yep.
Also an FOTM, by the way. But when Kathleen Wynne is no longer a leader but still an MPP, does she have security detail?
No.
So it is interesting because I know presidents have it forever,
Continues,
obviously.
Yes.
But
Mr. Trump will have it until his last days.
Right.
Jimmy Carter had it, Ronald
Who's
Reagan.
Still with us.
Yes.
Did he set a new record for longest time living in palliative care?
Yeah.
And good for him, because that, by all accounts, a gentleman.
It's a sad thing, Mike, that the security is required. And when I started at Queen's Park after the 1981 election, I'm talking 1981, folks, not 1881. In case people, remember my career.
You never know.
You could walk right into the building. There was no security pass. There was no metal detectors, and now that's all become, sadly, a part of the reality of political life in Ontario, in Ottawa, in Alberta, you name it.
But it's because there's a move by the far right to make you guys out to be the bad guys. Like, I do know of news people who drove cars with the station, they call that livery, okay? So that's the station branding on the car, who have requested that they remove that livery and drive cars without it because they are targeted as members of the media and being in bed with Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party.
Look, I think the one thing, I used to talk to a lot of students who are interested in being political journalists, and I think the one thing you have to know at the beginning of that process is people are going to see and hear things that they want to see and hear that may not be there. If I was tough on Mike Harris, he's anti-conservative, and he must be pro-NDP or pro-liberal. If I was tough on Dalton McGuinty, and I certainly was, and for good reason, he's a Tory plant. He's an NDP plant. If you asked an easy question to get Bob Ray talking, and God knows Bob Ray can talk, we used to have to lock the doors at Global to keep him out as a guest from Focus Ontario. But that's another story.
We're gonna get there.
Yeah, I sort of regret that the People's Parliament, if you will, getting sort of very esoteric here, is you don't see school tours anymore because of the language on the floor and the shouting and screaming and threats. Come on outside, I'll beat you up, and this is crazy. But it is kind of the way politics has evolved. I remember the days, Mike, at Christmas, when the premier of the day would cross the two sword lengths between the opposition and government benches to shake the hand of the leader of the opposition and wish him or her a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year. That just disappeared now. End of the session, boom, they're out of there, and there's hardly a wave goodbye.
We've lost some civility there. That's a shame here. Okay, so you mentioned early 80s. You're at Queen's Park. You're a reporter for CBC Television. So how did you get to CBC Television?
Well, I was interesting. I was a graduate student at Carleton working on my master's degree, which makes me kind of a guinea pig because I have no undergraduate degree. I have a college diploma and a master's degree.
You skipped it.
I skipped it, but they had me do my university in 2 years. But luckily for me, that first year, I could pick the courses I wanted to take. So Canadian politics, Canadian history, labor law. I mean, it was wonderful. And the second year, graduate year, I worked on a thesis.
And no math required here?
No math. My goodness, no math. And no welding. But, I always told people if the axle of the campaign bus were to break and somebody had an oxyacetylene unit,
you could handle it.
I could handle it.
Which is a valued skill. And we need more welders. This is when I was going to school in the 80s. You had to go to university, and only the dummies were getting trades. And now we look back, and how many people at their cottages, maybe neighbors of Doug Ford's for all I know, who run their own businesses because they took a trade, like they're plumbers or they're electricians. And we're so in need of these skills.
When I retired, my final day at CBC was July 23rd, 2015.
Right.
And I got a phone call at my desk, and the voice said, "Robert, it's Bill Davis." We had an hour-long conversation about life and politics. It was amazing. I didn't record it, but I certainly remembered a lot of things he said. And one of the things he talked about was the creation in 1967 of the college system. And he told me how much abuse, my word, not his, but sort of he'd taken from universities who said, if you create these colleges, you're going to diminish the importance and the quality of our university education. And Mr. Davis said to them and said to me, I knew in 67 it was the right decision, and in 2015, I still believe it was the right decision.
A visionary. That's amazing. Okay, so you're still on your way to CBC TV.
Yep. So I was a summer student with 10 years of radio experience, and I was assigned, which not necessarily a good thing, to work at the National with Knowlton Nash. Good night. Wonderful Knowlton. Jan Tennant. George McLean. Only George's bottom lip moved when he read. He had this mustache. But, like the people, and God, Parliament Hill, Peter Mansbridge, and David, I was going to say David Diven, but it wasn't. Anyway, the name will come to me.
Sure.
Really quality people. So I learned a lot. But then the contract ran out, and so there was an opening at CBC Toronto, CBLT then, Channel 5. I applied as a reporter and was hired as a reporter. And the first assignment was to continue covering the train derailment in Mississauga,
right? Talking
to people like the great Hazel McCallion, walking through empty streets and whatever. It was hiding under the CBC News car because these tanker cars were exploding and they were afraid they might hurt somebody. And then I applied for and got the television job covering CBC bureau at City Hall, Toronto City Hall. So I got to, cover John Sewell and Art Eggleton and people like that. Met some great people. And then it was sort of natural flow that, if you do municipal politics, the next step would be provincial. And so there was somebody covering Queen's Park in those days. The CBC, quite frankly, was not happy with him. And so I got put onto the 81 campaign with Bill Davis. And the rest is history. The story from the 81 campaign that I wanted to tell you about, the thong,
right,
as opposed to the throng. I was speaking in Brampton when Mr. Davis got the key to the city from the mayor.
Right.
His response was he got it. Mr. Davis was physically in pretty bad shape, and I think that his end was pretty near, although we didn't realize how close. And he got up and he said to the mayor, he said, well, this is great, but he said 2 questions. Why did you take so long? And number 2, does this key open anything in Brampton? In any event, we all spoke. There was Pinball Clements, Hazel McCallion, Neil Davis, one of Mr. Davis's children, spoke. There's another woman, John McDermott, former Tory MP for Brampton, and Mayor Brown as well. So I got up and I was explaining to the audience that I met Mr. Davis back in 1981. I said, I met him in a little town called Exeter, Ontario. Factoid, it's the hometown of Janet Ecker, who was at one point finance minister in Ontario. One of the great women politicians in Ontario.
Keep the fun facts coming.
Okay, so my first day on the campaign trail were in Exeter, in Exeter, Ontario, a little small town, right near a place called Reese's Corners, and after a tornado, the locals called it Reese's Pieces. Oh. So I approached this group of reporters talking to Mr. Davis, who was Main Streeting, and I'm telling the story to the audience. I said, as I approached, I saw this throng of reporters, and there's a lot of laughter, and I was trying. How do I get out of this? I'm probably as red as anything, and blushing with embarrassment. Mr. Davis laughed, Mrs. Davis laughed, John Tory, they all laughed. That was hilarious. I said, I told you I was talking about progressive conservatives. But and in those days, I had the mustache. And the trench coat, of course, because that's obligatory wear.
I can't even picture Knowlton Nash without the trench coat.
Well, and his glasses were not real, right?
I didn't know that.
They're just glass.
To make him look smarter.
Well, I think so. But you know what? He was, this is a big star in journalism, right? As a correspondent, Washington, all over the place.
Sure.
Then coming back to anchor the news. He was the nicest man. I met a lot of people sort of on the way up who were not very nice. Okay,
I need those names.
Well,
we don't have that kind of time.
Beep 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 beep. But just anyway, it was one of those moments that you just had to quickly think about something. But sadly, he left, and he left a huge legacy. I mean, as a graduate of a community college, how grateful I am that he created those colleges. Because what would I have done? Would I have become a welder? It's a sort of for me, a little scary prospect, actually.
Now, I'm at that event you're describing there. I'm sure Paikin must have been there, right? Like if there's a
Paikin was in diapers in 1981. He's a very young guy.
True.
Okay,
that's true. He was probably at U of T or something.
Yeah,
but
studying.
Did you overlap at CBLT, CBC Toronto? Did you overlap with Paikin?
Yes, briefly.
Okay,
but I had taken the siren call of fame and fortune to go to Barbara Green Road and Global Television.
Well, we're going to do that right now. Except, did you cross paths at CBLT with Bruce Dobigan?
Yes. Before he became what he is now.
A right-wing nut? My words, not yours. I can say that because he's a good FOTM who I quite like. But
he's a very talented,
moved out west
very
and he became
guy.
radical.
I think living in Alberta, often does that.
He'll tell you. He sees the world differently now.
Yeah.
But this book here, I see your glass. I won't move it because your glasses are on top of it. But that is a self-published book by Bruce Dobigan and his son Evan. And it's on the greatest... basically the greatest NHL trades, the biggest trades that stunned the NHL. And because they self-published it, as you can imagine, awareness is everything. So I didn't take any money from FOTM Bruce Dobigan, but I told him, I'm happy to give your book to guests like Robert Fisher because that way I'm forced to tell the listenership it exists. So Deal With It is the name of the book, and you can buy it now. Bruce, again, and his son, Evan, who doesn't live too far from here.
Really?
They wrote it together. And
forward by the aforementioned Steve Paikin.
Well,
it's
Bruce
a thread that runs through this whole 6 hours.
Paikin and Bob Ray. But I will say that there was a radio show on the Fan 590 called Double Play that was Steve Paikin and Bruce Dobigan. And the deal was, I think they did the show for free, but they sold their own ads. Like that was the idea. Like we'll give you, and this was like ahead of its time because I think that's how almost all commercial radio is kind of like that now. Maybe you can.
Brian Williams was the sports guy at CBLT.
Well, time right now 11:07.
I got to tell you, we're ready to roll that tape. He used to rehearse in the newsroom, Mike. You'd be sitting at your desk writing, Premier Bill Davis, and you'd hear, so tonight in the Chicago Stadium, the Blackhawks face, and he would walk right by your desk and go to the end of the newsroom and then walk back and do the second story. And he was always extremely well prepared and was a total professional.
Oh, listen, until Robert Fisher came down these stairs in his wet jacket, I got to say, having Brian Williams down here was a highlight. I'm saying, Brian, what a conversation, what a legend.
He is a legend.
Williams.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, so let's get you to Global here. Why do you leave CBC Television for Global Television Network? One
word was opportunity. I had always thought that I could parlay my gravitas, so-called, my nice shirts and ties and pocket puffs into an anchor job. But in those days, the union at CBC, this would be 1989 maybe, wouldn't allow that. You were either a reporter or you were a news reader.
Really?
Okay. I mean, one of the reasons Lloyd Robertson left the CBC to go to CTV was they wouldn't let him write anything.
Right.
And he wanted to have a chance to write because you want to put ownership into your newscast. You don't want to accept the words of strangers or colleagues rather, all the time.
Right.
And so he left. So I went to Global, and one of the first things they did was they said to me, now you're here, now you're bureau chief. We need a political show on television on a Saturday night, 6:30. And we want it on this Saturday night, and this is Wednesday. So what do you want to do? And I said, well, I did Dateline Ontario. Oh, we can't possibly call it Dateline Ontario. We'll call it Focus Ontario.
Right.
Because they were doing polling with a company in Toronto at that point, and their reports came out on black binders with Focus Ontario. And I said to the news guy, executive producer, I think we'll call it Focus Ontario. And he had never looked at the books behind him on the bookshelf. So it became Focus Ontario. Now, I have to tell you honestly, some Liberals, New Democrats, and Tories had another F word that was often used to describe the show, and would come into, cabin on a Wednesday morning. So, were you on blank Ontario, and how was it, or something? But it was a show we created, and, in spite of, and we'll talk about this, Global's difficulties, I think it's still on the air, longest running show, huge number of hosts that followed me. I did it for 12 years. We started one July night and on a Saturday night, and it just continued every night after that. And I had some convincing from Global, because they wanted a tougher kind of, let's have some blood on the carpet type show. And I said to them, if you do that, these guests will never come back. Right. You can ask tough questions, but they have to be fair. I think Bob Ray, if he were here, I hope he'd say this, that Fisher was tough but fair.
Right.
Yeah. So then it just sort of evolved, and it fit my needs. I was the bureau chief at Queen's Park. The program gave me quite a bit of a push in terms of reporters and their importance at Queen's Park. It was very nice. People knew me, saw me, wanted to be on Focus Ontario. So there were 12 great years. And then one day I got a call to go to the Prince Hotel. Not that I remember this day, but it was the second floor, room 202. Walked in, the head of, I was going to say in human resources, but it was actually HR, and the then vice president, an old friend of mine, sadly. And they said, look, you no longer fit in, so here's your severance package. And I was at 12 years, and at the time I was doing 3 jobs. Peter Kent was away, so I was doing First National at 6:30. I was hosting Focus Ontario and doing the Global News at 11. And it was a shock, and it really stung, and it still does. I mean, my children were, beside themselves. I mean, my son had some pretty nasty comments made by some schoolmates, could be pretty cruel. Oh, your dad got fired, eh? That, just the official term was contract not renewed.
Right.
But then somebody decided that they should embellish the dismissal and talked about, Robert was abusive to his co-host, and this really hurt. This really cut deep. Okay, there was no humor in this story.
No,
and so you got my job, you got my show, you got my office, you got my business cards, you got my keys to the building, all that sort of stuff, but you're not going to get my reputation. So right. I hired a lawyer, and the thing went to head office in Winnipeg at the time, with one of the Aspers still running Global. That's when they were still successful. And we had an out-of-court settlement. Now, the fact that I live in a luxurious home on a lake in Eastern Ontario may or may not have been part of that settlement. I did got my computer and all that sort of stuff. And then I was like 55 at the time, and you sort of think, boy, it's over, right?
Yeah, that's a tough time to get.
And then John McGrath, dropping names here. Forget about Steve for a minute.
Yeah,
think about John.
Already forgot about him. Steve who?
Is Steve? What's his name?
Yeah.
He and the other fella. He told the CBC guys, look, Fisher is available. You should hire this guy. He knows Queen's Park inside out. Blah 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 and so forth. And it took them about 6 months to finally put me on the weekend news on radio, but they did hire me, and then I had 13 wonderful last years in the business, so 56 years in total.
Wow!
As an 18-year-old kid and leaving in 2015.
No, hell of a career. That's why I said living legend alert. That's why this little alarm was going off in the corner. Living legend alert going off here. But I got to ask some more questions about you getting fired from Global. Okay, so. If you go, and again, I want you to speak to the accuracy here, but if you go to your Wikipedia page right now, I'm going to read what I just copied and pasted the line. He was fired from Global in 2000 after criticizing what he perceived as the network's shift toward infotainment reporting. Like that's on your Wikipedia page, but listening to you didn't even mention anything of the nature.
No, I
Is
mean,
that
I
accurate?
think there was probably, look, I was expensive, and it used to be said at Global they didn't want people retiring from Global because Izzy Asper didn't want to pay the pension stuff, right? That was kind of the talk of the time. So yes, I was deeply concerned about the creation of infotainment and the sort of let's not get the facts in the way of a good story sort of approach. But the other thing that I think was my ultimate undoing was that I worked with a colleague who ended up hosting conservative fundraisers for Mike Harris.
Right.
And Global was required to go out and get pictures of this person at this and I just thought this was absolutely outrageous that a news anchor would be hosting and, on a podium with a co-host who was making jokes about striking teachers and all that sort of stuff, and then coming back the next night and reporting on the latest, development in the teachers' dispute with the then Harris government. I just thought that was wrong, and I blew the whistle on it, and I think that whistleblow was the eventual last call for me, I'll tell you.
How do you feel? I just thought of this when you were speaking there, but how do you feel about today? He's retired from the CBC himself, but Peter Mansbridge does now do advertisements for reverse mortgages.
Yep.
Like as a longtime news guy, how do you feel about that?
It makes me very uncomfortable. I mean, I think the only thing I've ever promoted in my life has been fundraising for Parkinson Canada. Okay.
Right.
And I put my name right in front of that because I think it's such an important cause and so important issue, and the fact that we have a healthcare system that is not ready for what Michael J. Fox calls the future tsunami of cases in the United States and Canada. But that's an aside. So this commercial stuff, I mean, I don't think Peter needs the money. I think he lives very well. He lived well. He made the coin of the realm.
Got a home in Scotland.
Yes, apparently. Home in Stratford. I mean, he's got a working wife who's an actress.
And his working wife, beloved FOTM, love that woman. Went to my high school.
She and I are both celiacs.
Oh, she couldn't take the pasta.
She couldn't take the pasta
or the beer.
Well, I could sell this and
you got
bring the money
people
back
who will
to
enjoy it. Just quick fun fact, because we're talking about politics, is that Bonnie Crombie and Cynthia Dale were both friendly at Michael Power High School together. They were in the same grade. Yeah.
Wow.
So there's just to bring it all back. So Peter Mansbridge's wife was a high school.
So I'm not going to judge Peter. I have my own personal. I would never do that myself. I mean, right. I had opportunities, in my career to move out of journalism and go into GR work or media training, and I just wasn't comfortable with that. I looked at some videotapes of a guy who worked for a company in Toronto, and he, basically convinced this poor executive that he was doing the right thing to fire 200 people who were over 56 or something. And I don't, oh my God, I was sort of sick to my stomach, to tell you the truth. But
everyone's got to pay the mortgage.
Pay the mortgage.
Feed your family.
My God, I could have bought Big Rito Lake, But it just, the first actual approach was from the TTC. They wanted me to do, and media relations, and TTC, cars that didn't fit on the tracks.
Wait, is this after 2015?
No.
Okay.
No, nobody's approached me after 2015. Gotcha. I'm available. Mike's my agent.
Listen.
Actually, it's Simon Dingley, because he's been promoting this appearance.
Simon Dingley kicked ass in his Toronto Mike debut, but he was a guy... Okay, he came over on, I think I'm going to be close and maybe off by a day or two, but he might have been here on like a Monday, and his last day was Friday of the same week. And he made a special, very rare request, and I only did this because Simon Dingley gave such good podcast. But he said, would you mind holding on to the episode and then drop it after my last shift? Because, and I kind of was wondering, this is going to tie into... what happened with Neil Herland recently, who is with CBC Radio right now. But he didn't want it seen that he accepted Great Lakes beer and Palma pasta, even though he's retiring, by all accounts, he chose to take the package and leave. And he only had mere days left before him and Jeannie were going to head off to Costa Rica or something like that. I don't know.
Two great people.
Jeannie should come on Toronto Mike, right? She has just announced her retirement.
Yes, she should be on because she's got some great stories.
Okay.
And Simon, as you know, because I think you know him, had some health challenges in his career, some injuries and things that were pretty dark times. And Jeannie, boy, God bless that woman. She was there supporting him all the way, convincing him to go back to work and things. So they were the dynamic duo of CBC Television.
And they met in Montreal, right?
Yeah, at CFCF, or what is now CTV Montreal.
So here's an idea, a couple of quick thoughts have hit me. So firstly, that you talking about, how you only would, shill for a charity, like a good cause charity. But I was thinking that explains why I think when Neil Herland comes on Toronto Mike, his boss asks him not to accept any gift. So there is no optics, no, I don't know. One day there'll be a story on, there's also, Doug Ford likes alcohol and booze sales, and every other thing he says seems to be about beer.
So he doesn't drink, right?
But he doesn't drink, right? Yeah. And his brother had an issue with beer, I believe was an alcoholic, if I'm correct on that. But so that's that aside. Why even create an optic that you'd be favoring Great Lakes Brewery because you received free Great Lakes beer for doing a podcast? So Neil Herland didn't accept anything, and he really didn't. Like, it wasn't a wink, wink. I'm not taking this. He didn't take anything. But
and I wasn't kidding about the NW root beer mug. I mean, we there was some promotion, and the NW sent over gazillions of gallons of root beer, and they sent those large frosty mugs, right?
I can see it now, yeah.
And they said, please accept them as a small gift. I didn't really think that I'd ever have an A&W root beer story to tell, apart from
but you never know.
My teen years in Cornwall, going to the first A&W ever.
The Mama Burger
there.
Or the Papa Burger? What was your burger there? Teen Burger?
The Coney Burger, Coney Island Burger with chili on the top.
Right.
And the young women who brought the tray to the car, put it on the window, and had roller skates, and they, this is not that far along. It's big.
Well, this is like Happy Days here.
Happy Days. So look, it's the CBC. It is the CBC.
Right.
A&W would never buy my support because they said, here, keep this glass mug, And I know that Great Lakes beer exists, and it's a fine brewery, and it's a fine product, and they wisely
fiercely independent.
Not
they
support
up
the
yet
show
by the conglomerates.
But the fact that Neil couldn't take 4 beer, how is that going to affect his credibility with the audience?
But maybe it's not worth the risk, right?
Well, maybe some people
pay you a
might
salary, buy your own Great Lakes beer, right? Okay, but now this person's brother worked at the CBC, but I was thinking, hearing you talk, and your delivery, it's hilarious to me because you're kind of like the straight man delivering funny lines, and I feel like that's exactly what Leslie Nielsen did in The Naked Gun and Airplane and everything. And I think we reboot The Naked Gun, you in the role of Frank Drebin, or at least in that role, because you would be great. And Leslie Nielsen's brother, longtime CBC reporter.
Yes, absolutely.
Just to bring it back to the CBC.
Back to the CBC. Well, if the offer comes along, far be it from me to say no.
Let me get on the phone of the Zuckers and Abrams. Okay. So we have big news. This is Tuesday we're recording. So just yesterday, and we saw the writing on the wall. I can name you some good guests like Farah Nasser and Alan Carter and Colleen Rushholm and Bob Willett. Shout out to Bingo Bob. Mm-hmm. But good people at Chorus have been tapped on the shoulder recently. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like there's going to be 300 more. Mm-hmm. And the goal is to eliminate 25% of the Chorus.
Like 800 jobs or something?
In total, I think they've already done 500. It's like got 300 to go or whatever. So this summer, there'll be 300 good, hardworking Chorus employees. I don't know if they're all hardworking, but 300 people are going to get that tap on the shoulder in that manila
that call
envelope.
To the office.
Right. So what are your thoughts on what's going down with Chorus and global news in particular today?
It's just not good. You need competition. I'll tell you quite frankly, there were times at CBC when they didn't pay attention to what global is. Just before I got there, didn't pay attention to global because, it's just global TV. And in fact, when I announced I was leaving CBC to go to global, I had people come up to me and say, "You're nuts. You're nuts. That place is junk. There's nobody that's worth their weight in gold."
Was Peter Kent there yet?
No, Peter Kent came.
Okay, because that man's worth his weight in gold. I think that guy's fantastic.
Yeah, Peter and I worked very closely together.
Listen to his episode of Toronto Mike. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Peter Kent, Toronto Mike. That's your homework. Okay.
He mentioned me like I mentioned him. No, it doesn't matter.
Maybe.
So it's a sad thing because there's going to be fewer people out there to check things and follow politicians and follow stories and look, a lot of these people, it's going to really rock their world to get that slip of paper, that pat on the back and say, thank you for your 15 or 20 years, but you're you're gone.
And these are high-profile people. I think Farah Nasser, for particular, was a very high-profile anchor at Global News. And so these are the kind of people who, probably because they make a decent salary, right? So
you're expendable. And you see at Global, and I was expendable because I was on contract. There was no union protection for me.
Right.
And it was the end of the season, so-called. So this happened in August.
Easy cut.
And they want easy cut. And, your contract's up and we're not renewing it, so goodbye. And you don't fit in, so leave the building.
But Robert, before we get you back to CBC Radio, and then, but we have in Canada news here, we have Global. They're going to make so many cuts that you're going to have like one guy out of some office in Toronto doing the news everywhere or something. Who knows? So they're going to make massive cuts to Global News. Okay, if there's still going to be a Global News, we'll see. Because, of course, there was a Toronto Star article that said, and I had previously tweeted this, but that they could be on the brink. They're on the brinks of bankruptcy. Like this loan coming in and the amount of money that they're currently making with their radio and television products. Big trouble. Yeah. Big trouble at Chorus. So if Global News is decimated, we just talked about how should Pierre Poilievre become prime minister, the defunding of the CBC, like what's that going to be? So now you got the CBC being defunded, whatever that will mean, and you have Global News in big trouble. So now is it like we're now relying on the two cable companies to present the news in this country? And we all know the cuts that happens at Bell Media all the time. And of course, Rogers as well. Like, and we're in dire straits.
Yeah, I mean, look, CTV Ottawa just lost Graham Richardson as their co-anchor at 6 o'clock. That's a huge loss. Now, he's gone to a private sector job, and he's going to be very successful, and he's a terrific guy.
Might move into your
But again, you have that institutional memory, you have that gravitas, you have his ability to mentor young reporters. You get rid of these people who are, high salaried, and you lose the ability for these young people to have somebody to turn to and say, I made a mistake, what do I do? How do I correct it? Or who do I talk to? And, I taught law and ethics at Centennial College in Toronto for a year or so, and I used to tell my students, I'm not going to make you lawyers. I'm going to keep you away from the lawyers, okay? So watch the libel, the slander, all that sort of stuff. And now you're suddenly going to have losing people like Graham, but that he left on his own. It had nothing to do with Bell Media cuts, but that they've been decimated.
But he might have seen the writing on the wall. And
maybe,
but like a lot of people,
yeah.
would, and I don't know, I can't remember how he answered it, but he was careful. But, would Simon Dingley have taken the package now if there wasn't an imminent Conservative Party with a pledge to defund CBC?
I think, too, at the time, people like Simon and eventually Jeannie Lee, his wife, from the business unit, left because, there have been a lot of rumors about major cuts at CBC, and now that seems to be in abeyance. It's like the financial problems are gone magically. How did that happen? Where did they find all this money? I don't know. Well, but people are leaving. I mean, CBC Radio in Toronto just lost one of the pillars of that news operation, particularly for Metro Morning, in Mary Weens, one of the great storytellers in the business. She's, by the way, a very talented jazz pianist, and she's looking for gigs. So,
will she come on Toronto Mic'd?
Well, I would.
Would you introduce us?
I will introduce you. Very talented woman.
Oh, I'd love to talk to her.
Yep.
By the way, the board of directors for CBC and Radio Canada has approved bonuses for some staff following a fiscal year that saw 141 employees let go and another 205 vacant positions eliminated. This was news this week too, that basically, we'll look at this for next time, but massive bonuses go out to the board of directors for CBC, even though they're cutting.
Yeah, and the thing that really irks me, that causes that tattoo on my derriere to kind of shrivel up, is the fact that there's so much repeat broadcasting on radio. It's on, the same program is on all of the time. It's repeated twice. It's 3 times.
Right.
The news is even repeated hour after hour after hour.
Yeah.
And so if you hear the 6:30 news, to be honest with you, it's not really worth your while to listen to the 7:30 because it's the 6:30 and the 6:30 is the 8:30 and so on and so on.
Right.
But it's because they don't have the staff. And some people, I'll be honest with you, some people I worked with are bone lazy. And so they get the print out of the newscast and they just keep reading the same thing over and over
Rip
again.
and read.
And so my concern is with management, nobody's listening. This is not acceptable. It wasn't acceptable when I was there. It wasn't acceptable for Michael Enright, for Peter Mansbridge. They wanted quality, and it was quality broadcasting. And now it's just, well, let's repeat this show. Let's repeat that comment. Let's repeat that report.
But there are still good news people doing their best with.
Under difficult circumstances. Right. Believe me, this is no walk in the park for a lot of people who are trying to put the National out every night and radio newscasts throughout the day and so forth.
So, before we get you back to CBC Radio, the reason I'm wearing this T-shirt here is it's important I ask you about something, because now I see on the live stream that Andrew's literally yelling at me because he's putting it in all caps. He wants me to ask you, Robert Fisher, about when you nearly changed jobs during the Davis years from journalist to MPP. Is there a story there, Mr. Fisher?
There is, a very brief one. Mr. Davis had a photo opportunity in his office, and my camera person, I was going to say cameraman, but in my day, in the 80s, they were cameramen, but now there are some extraordinary women who are
the cameras,
videographers. Yeah, and they're lighter. The TK-76, it weighed 6,000 pounds. It was solid steel. It was incredible. Right. So many people ended up with bad knees and bad shoulders. So we ended up going into Mr. Davis's office, and lo and behold, we were the first there. So my camera person is setting up the sticks for the thing, and so I'm in the middle between Mr. Davis on my left. I think probably he was on my left. And on my right was John Tory, then the young, very talented principal secretary to the Premier of Ontario. Mr. Davis with the trademark pipe, which was rarely lit, I mean, you could smoke in the legislature in those days, but his pipe was rarely lit. He took the pipe out and he said, so Robert, you ever thought of running? And I paused for a second and said, but Mr. Davis, for which party? And he looked at John Tory and he said, this interview's over. And I knew they were looking for a Conservative candidate in the Cornwall area.
Right.
And somebody must have put the bug in his ear that, well, maybe Fisher would do it,
Well, Peter Kent's a good example of a news person who had great success.
Going to the dark side. But anyway, that's another. So I turned it down. But subsequent to that, there were other offers. One of the most interesting was there were two federal offers. The NDP in Broadview Greenwood approached me to run for a seat at the same time as the Canadian something or other, I think the acronym was CRAP party came out. And they wanted, so one end of the spectrum and then the other, And I said to the NDP, well, so what are you going to offer me when I don't win? A Senate seat or something? And they all laughed. So, I had a friend who said, why don't you go after both nominations? It'd be a hell of a story.
Yeah.
The right-wing party and the left-wing party both.
Oh, that's funny. That's like when I told Bob Ray he should run as a Conservative candidate because then he could have the full set, basically.
The hat trick. I don't think, I have nothing but intuition. I don't think we've heard the last of Mr. Ray after his extra year as ambassador. I got a feeling that he's,
I wouldn't doubt that for a second. He's got that itch. He's got a scratch. He's not quite done with politics yet here.
No,
absolutely. All right. So we talked about Global not renewing your contract, and then this slander. Maybe you got a lawyer as good as Lauren Honickman. I don't know who your lawyer was.
No, I didn't get Lauren, but I got
Lauren does slander law.
Yeah, got a very good lawyer.
Do we have a number now? I feel like you can tell us the number now. What did you get from Global for that slander?
I guess it ended up to be about 2 years of salary, which
and what was that salary again? I can't remember.
What, $55 a week? It was, 6 figures plus.
I'm just wondering how far I can push you.
You want me to count the free Hathaway shirts and the wardrobe?
And how many mugs did you take exactly from A&W?
Well, actually,
if I saw your, do you have a room full of A&W mugs?
No, I gave it to my son. I think he's using it to keep pencils at his desk.
I have a mug here, similar to those A&W mugs, I guess, which I got in 1984 because I loved Andre the Giant. Okay, I was a big Andre the Giant fan. And at my local Byway, they were selling these mugs, and I picked it up in 84. And I've held on to it now. I'm going to say that's it's exactly 40 years. So I still have it here in the studio.
Gee, I haven't got the glasses on, but from where I'm sitting, it looks like Steve Paikin. One of the things Bill Davis did after his retirement as premier, he played a huge role in making sure TV Ontario existed on a continuing basis.
Yeah,
I used to tell people that Mr. Davis was protecting Pokeroo and Paikin, right? And he did, with no fanfare. I mean, I think it's fair to say that the studio or Paikin operates his show on is the William G. Davis studio, and they now have a control room named after late lamented, whose gentleman, I forget, but he was just honored by
Herndorf?
Yeah, Mr. Peter Herndorf.
Right.
So, Davis did that kind of thing. And just to get one other story about him, a lot of people forgot who he was. And he used to consult. I've been writing about this in my book. I think it's fair to say he was the first, or one of the first calls that Bob Rae got after he won in 1990. It's a surprise election win. He consulted with Dolph McGuinty, Kathleen Wynne. I don't think he ever did any work with Frank Miller, or of course Frank wasn't around for more than 8 months,
right?
Or Mike Harris, because they were diametrically opposed in their ideology. Though Mr. Davis put Mr. Harris in cabinet. So Mr. Davis went to see Janet Ecker, who was then the education minister, one day, and
from Exeter.
Yes, from Exeter, right.
So paying attention.
Yeah, paying attention. He goes into the office and he says, "Hello, I'd like to see Miss Ecker." And this young receptionist said, "Oh, excuse me, sir, but you just can't show up and expect the minister to draw up everything and come out to talk to you, and so you'll have to make an appointment, right?" So he puts his trench coat on, puts his pipe back in his mouth, turns and walks away. Young woman goes into the office and says to our senior person, "There was just some old guy out front here. Just showed up wanting to meet Janet Ecker. He had white hair, a pipe, and a trench coat. So the person said, "Well, what's his name?" "Well, Bill Davis." And I'm not sure exactly the response in words that was used, but I think that, maybe taken to the woodshed over that kind of treatment,
That's great.
Yeah.
All right, here's a hard-hitting question from Paul, who heard you were coming on. And Paul's question, I'll just read it as it was written. I would love to know why Doug Ford's feet aren't held to the fire by anybody, regarding his drug dealing days back in Etobicoke. This speaks directly to his character and shouldn't be ignored. He should have to answer in public for his drug dealing. So that was Paul. And before you respond, I'll just say, anecdotally, I feel like, how you say, oh, you've met like 500,000 people who say they were at like the first Blue Jay game in 1977, right? You're like, yeah, okay. I think I've met several thousand people now who bought drugs from Doug Ford in Etobicoke.
It was Camaro
right.
with the darkened windows.
So what would you say to Paul?
Well, the Globe and Mail tried, and they blew the whole story right out in the open, and giving Mr. Ford every opportunity to take legal action, put them in the Court of Queen's Bench and, rake them over the coals. And his answer was, well, the Thompsons have so much money, it's not worth pursuing. But it's a fair point. I mean, in my lifetime, I never thought that, a former drug dealer in high school who didn't go beyond high school and had a few months in college and then
inherited his dad's label company
in business and went to Chicago and spent a lot of time in Navy Pier or something. That somebody like that would become the premier of Ontario. I mean, we used to have standards, all the populism aside. What is currently going on with this government, what has gone on, and what will go on is like beyond the pale. I keep hearing the words directed at Kathleen Wynne by Mr. Ford, criminal activity. I'm going to get to the bottom of it as soon as I win. We're going to investigate this kind of, it's corruption. Corruption's a criminal code offense. So if you think that went on, then why exactly? Why not pursue it?
Right.
And he's, look, the man is a bully. And boy, this is just going to get my neighbors upset. Mistakes are being made. Friends are benefiting from, I call it the family and friends events. Oh, we have an opening in the New York office. We have somebody we need to run the LCBO. Oh, and could you handle Ontario Place at the same time?
Right.
And when you came to the Stag and Dough for my daughter, was the dough DOUGH or was it something else?
Well, we've had the recent deal with the I think Belgium or Swiss, I can no longer remember, but the spa company Therme, I think.
Yeah, Therme. Yep.
So there's this privatized spa coming in and lots of public money, and it seems to be happening in the dark. Like it's just sort of, this is happening. The boards are up. I can't bike in Ontario Place anymore. Although William Davis as the namesake for this Trillium Park, where you can still bike Trillium Park, you just can't get to the Ontario Place side. Okay, but I digress. And then again, then you have this sudden. We got to close on Science Center. We got to close the Ontario Science Center now because
if the one report doesn't do it, let's get a second. And I was reading an article in Architecture Canada.
Yeah, because you were going to be an architect.
I was going to be an architect,
like George Costanza.
But the 48 just couldn't get me into architecture school at U of T or anywhere.
Right.
Who says the expense to repair is grossly exaggerated, and I think that the people around Mr. Ford are sometimes too clever by half. They bring out one report and everybody supports it, and then they bring out the CEO of Ontario Science Centre, who was appointed, a former Conservative MP, appointed to head up the board by Mr. Ford, and gosh, lo and behold, he says, they're right, and look at this report. It'll knock you out of your seat or something along those lines.
But this province continues to give his government a majority, and there's really nothing we can really do. We can,
and it would be easy to respond to that. And I'm thinking of the words of a Washington Post reporter who had a speech in Ottawa a few months back, and she said, the problem with the media and politics these days is that they follow the horse race. The latest poll, Polyev is up 20 points. Ford is up 30 points. So Bonnie Crombie is down to this, and Marit Stiles is nowhere to be seen, blah, 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 blah. And the Green Party is at 2%. But there are stories there that ought to be investigated. A government that promised to be open and transparent. Where is the openness and where is the transparency? I'll give you an example. This video that Mr. Ford and his gang put out just recently at the 413 future highway needed desperately in Ontario. No independent cameras were allowed on the site. So my mind, and I have nothing to back this up but intuition, was Mr. Ford really talking to real people who are building roads in Ontario, or are they actors? Remember the actors that came outside City TV after the first leaders debate?
Absolutely. No.
So how much, and a lot of times his events are closed. There's no media that are allowed into it. So they had this Propaganda Ontario webpage for a long time with his own reporter and everything else.
Yes.
I think that is just absolutely unbelievable. And the problem is that, that particularly during COVID, for example, reporters could ask one question and one follow-up, and that was it.
Boom.
And then sometimes, I can think of one reporter who asked some tough questions, and then suddenly, guess what? He's not on the list anymore, So that's the kind of retribution that I don't recall, quite honestly, straightforward about this, any premier I covered, stepping away, preventing the media to ask questions, didn't stand in and take every single question that was asked of him or her.
To that point, Robert Fisher, so we've talked too much about Steve Pagan, let's face it. I might have to edit out some of the Steve Pagan references in post, so I got to take a note to do that. But we talked quite a bit about TVO. Well, since TVO was created, was it Bill Davis who was it?
Yeah, Davis, Robarts, yeah.
So when TVO becomes TV Ontario, until the present day, only one premier of this province has refused to come in while they were premier, has refused to come in for a sit down interview. Yeah. Only one, and that's Doug Ford.
Yes, yep.
Which speaks to what you're
I've always thought, Mike, that if you are bringing out a policy and it may be controversial, if you can't defend that policy, then why the hell did you introduce it in the first place? If you can't defend what you're doing and make sense of it, instead of some, there's a lot of Trump in Ford, the exaggeration. This is the biggest project in the history of Ontario. So as a reporter, I'm thinking, so how do you check that? Maybe Bill Davis did something bigger, maybe creating all those universities and colleges. Maybe that qualifies as the biggest infrastructure, or, he would show up and he'd cut the ribbon at a hospital. He didn't build that hospital. It was built by the previous government. But,
sure.
Anyway.
Bullshit baffles brains, Robert.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's a sad thing, and people are not paying attention to the issues. They're only looking at the front page of the Star that says, Abacus Research says Mr. Ford's going to be reelected.
Right. Well, when I say bullshit baffles brains, I know what I'm talking about, Robert, because you are on, right now, Toronto Mike, the #1 podcast in the country.
That's the only reason I'm here. I've turned down so many other people.
Well, listen, I'm honored to have you here. I want to wrap up the CBC Radio because, I would listen to you on CBC Radio. I had Jill Dempsey on just last week. She made her Toronto Mike debut. She She did accept the gifts, by the way, Jill Dempsey. I don't want to get in trouble, but
No,
she took
she
that
won't be
beer
there
and that
Monday.
pasta. We won't hear her voice tomorrow after I've revealed that here. But okay, so you basically got an offer to come to CBC Radio because you're Robert Fisher, for goodness sakes. And
it took them a while to realize that. But
so
yes,
how much time between the manila envelope being? I guess you were just not renewed. Your contract just was not renewed, so they just give you an FYI.
Yeah.
Don't come to work Monday. Your pass card.
Well, don't
work.
come to work tomorrow.
Right.
I mean, I had a taping planned with Gord Wilson, who was then president of the Ontario Federation of Labour, the next night. And he called me and he said, "You've been fired. I will not do the show." And I'm not bragging here, but I said to him, "Gord, you've got important issues and people that count on you. You do the show." And he did the show. But the president of the OSSTF wrote a long, blistering letter to Global asking, what had happened here, and with, no explanation.
Fascinating.
And they never told, the sad thing was, Mike, I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to people, to thank them for their support on things like Focus Ontario, my political reporting. Not everybody was supportive, and people were critical. And they, as I said, they saw things, heard things, and, but I had 12 great years at Global because I worked with exceptional people and I had lots of support, and it was a real treat, and people recognize me. People who tell you in this business, "Oh, I don't want to be recognized." It's full of baloney, Quick story.
Yeah.
Blue Jay game,
Yeah.
family. This is years ago when they were winning consistently. Sorry, I'll go see the Toronto Maple Leafs play baseball instead. We're in a Swiss chalet restaurant. We're having Sunday dinner, the four of us, daughter, son, and wife and I. These two elderly, they're probably my age. They spotted me and they waved and and they came over to the table and they sat down at the table, and my kids are like, "What is this?" So we had its lovely discussion. And they were like fans of Focus Ontario. They loved to see the Premier and the Education Minister up there. So it went on for about 20 minutes, and my kids were kind of getting antsy. And I said to them, "Look, this has been wonderful." And it was. They were very nice. 90% of the people I met were nice. No threats, no swearing, no whatever. I said, "But, I've arranged with the waiter to provide you with dessert on me. So if you return to your table, they're going to bring you the menu, and I'll pay for dessert." And they ordered their pecan pie, Swiss chalet chicken.
That's a great story, but that's a clever way to get them.
I had people, come up to me on the streetcar when I was going home at night after being on radio, and they'd say, "You're Fisher, right?" Well, why the hell did they move that show from, Coronation Street? You got to tell them, don't move Coronation Street. And well, thank you. The nicest thing that was ever said to me was a young Asian couple on the subway. This almost made me cry. This couple was sitting next to me. They were in their 20s. He looked at me and he said, "Excuse me, sir." They call me sir. It's the Bob Ray gray hair. He said, Are you Robert Fisher?" And you sort of like, okay, if I say yes, what, does a gun come out? Does a knife, whatever. Anyway, not that I expected it, but they were just lovely. And I said, "Yes, I'm Robert." And she said, I listened to you in the radio to practice my English.
Oh, that's great.
I loved your pronunciation. I loved your enunciation.
Diction,
I learned so much. And that was, I tell you, that really,
That's awesome. And it didn't. I listened to quite a bit of Robert Fisher myself on the radio. Never helped my pronunciation. I can't say brewery to save my life. So it didn't help me, but I'm glad it's helping others here. Okay, so you're at CBC Radio. I'm hearing you on just here and now. I'm hearing you all over the place.
I was very lucky because I had opportunities. First Gulf War, I was working, weekends and some afternoons, and they came to me one day and said, "Okay, forget about your local news shift. You're going into work with Michael Enright." Scared the hell out of me. I'm going to work with Enright, reading the news of the First Gulf War, and he's going to do the comment. And it was great. When Barbara Budd was dismissed by As It Happens, the 2 weeks after that, guess who was the number 2 on As It Happens? When she was beloved by people, right?
Course.
So they throw Fisher into the fire, but that was when the theme music played in that studio, and I, for the first time,
dun, dun,
I could,
dun, dun,
my heart was kind of keeping beat, dum, dum, Anyway, I had great opportunities and great experiences, and I would say 13 wonderful years at the CBC.
So that tells me you're not on the air for 9/11? Because you leave Global in 2000, but if you did 13 and ended in, see, I'm doing my math. I got more than 48 in my math, okay?
Yeah.
But that's 2015.
No, I was at CBC for 2011. I was
for 9/11?
But that was my first afternoon shift.
So then you probably did closer to 14 years at CBC.
I told you math wasn't
math's not your strong suit. But were you working the day of 9/11?
Yes. And that's the first time I've in my life ever had seen, and subsequent to that, people in tears, men and women, the hardened journalists.
Right.
Basically, people, I would say most people have caramel centers, the tough exterior. You have to inure yourself to some of the things you have to report and see and do and so forth. People the emotions when the second plane hit, it was like, I couldn't believe what we were seeing. Because I'm of the era that when the man landed on moon, it's being done by a production company in a Houston warehouse. It's not real. But I was working in Hamilton the day they landed on the moon. I still have all the wire copy from Associated Press. Man lands on moon. Big giant step for mankind, whatever. That was and the city just shut down. We were doing things like, there's no trains running, there's no subways, extra police. There was real panic in the city about what was going on and the devastation. But at the end of that day, this is going to sound corny and people are going to say, oh, yeah, he's doing. I left the building. I turned around and looked at that building. I was parking in the parking lot, which is now the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. It was a parking lot in those days. I looked back in that building and I said, boy, this is some great institution because of what the institution was doing, not just nationally on the internet, but locally, trying to help people deal with this issue on the meat and potato stuff. Could they get a subway train? Could they get on that via train to Ottawa or Windsor, whatever, And it was an amazing day, absolutely amazing day.
And I can see hardened journalists breaking down that day because, you've seen it all, but no one's seen that. Like that day just live forever. Yeah.
They sort of become signposts of things that have happened in your career. The Pierre Laporte murder, the kidnapping of James Cross, and the 9/11. Just the history I was able to see and report. A lot of it is taught in schools now. I tell people I covered the FLQ crisis.
Right.
It's like, I studied that. I saw a documentary, I read a book on it. One quick little story. I know you're running out of time. Sunday night. Alone in the newsroom, get a call from the switchboard operator, so that dates the story, right? The old pull thing. She said, Robert, you have to come out here right away. There's a provincial police officer who has to talk to you right away. Uh-huh. So I go running out. We're in the War Measures Act, by the way. Okay, so you got to be very careful. And he said, Robert Fisher? I said, yes. This is for you. He hands me an envelope, and it's marked, Quebec Provincial Police. I said, this is for me? He said, yes. You must open it and read it and use it. Okay, so what the heck is this? So I go back to the newsroom, open it up. It was wanted pictures, the wanted pictures of people like Jacques Langteau and Paul Rose. And to this day, I kept them. I still have these wanted photos and the little announcement of their suspects, thinking, what the heck did the police expect me to do in radio? Hold these pictures up to the microphone? Right. But this cop was determined that I had to get this package and I had to open it and I had to study it. And, but there's a lot of that screwy stuff that went on. The Mounties were following these guys and they let them go, and the cute provincial police let them go. And then
Quick question, because we've mentioned the name Michael Enright a few times. Are you friendly with him still? Are you in contact with him?
I haven't seen Michael in a long time, but we were very friendly. He had a great sense of humor. He had a great sense of style. It was the bow ties, the suspenders, the gravitas. To be interviewed by him, was right up there with like some of the greats that Peter Zosky, for example, people like that.
Sure,
just incredible experience. But I've lost touch, and I think it's such a loss to not have him around. I was doing political analysis up until the 2018 election, and then I got dropped by my beloved CBC.
Why were you dropped?
Because I was told, this is a quote, by someone I won't name, who's no longer there, that I was the wrong demographic.
Does that mean you're old?
Too old to talk about Ontario politics. So it's been.
Well, it's a shame we do that. The people who can actually speak. I was around for the FLQ crisis. I was there for this. I was there for that. Like,
but, you know,
have that perspective.
The thing is, Mike, the importance of that is, and just take me out of the equation here.
Yeah.
Political reporters need to have institutional memory. People need to know that, okay, so you've got Doug Ford and you had Mike Harris, but there was Bill Davis and there was Ernie Eves.
Right.
You know, they were different kind of conservatives. And, you know, the Liberals were in power with David Peterson and Dalton McGuinty, and Bob Rae did win the 1990 election. Didn't win a subsequent one, but you know, people in Portland, you know, the closest place to his location on the Big Rito, they would say, "Oh, congratulations on the election, Bob, but I didn't vote for you."
Right.
Which doesn't surprise me at all, considering people think I worked at the Communist Broadcasting Corporation.
Okay, a few quick hits here on the way out. So one is I just want to throw into the universe, if anybody is friendly with Michael Enright, I would love to have him on Toronto Mike. I did invite him on when he was at the CBC, and he told me he was too busy to come on Toronto
Well, I
Mike.
did that too, and then 9 years later,
And now, you know, three times a charm. It took us a few times to get this done, but
fought
this has
the
been
floods
amazing.
and fires and pestilence.
It's a long drive. So did you drive straight home from here?
I actually, to tell you the truth, I have a dental appointment. I have the most wonderful dentist in the world in Toronto, and we've been seeing
so
him.
you tied these. Good. I'm glad.
Yeah, he was just out of dental school when we picked him up as a dentist 40-some years ago. But
wow,
there you go.
he's a good one.
But then we'll go home.
All right,
Down
so
the
you gotta
boring 401, the road that is never finished.
No, that's never finished. Speaking of never finished, I'm just curious for your thoughts here on our way out on John Tory. So John Tory, I think he won 3 elections, if my memory is correct, and then quit. You know, and we all know that John Tory scandal. But what were your thoughts as that was unfolding on John Tory? And is there a comeback for John Tory?
Well, you never say
Possible?
never.
No.
You know, I mean,
Like he's not going to go away quietly, right? Like he's still around.
well, he's still. I'm sure he's got his fingers in something.
Well, he does some radio stuff on CFRB.
Yeah.
News Talk.
I mean, you know, he had a tough go as conservative leader. I don't think it was any secret around Queen's Park that his wife just detested how unsupportive the caucus was, and but he was a different. He was a red Tory, and the Tories are now blue Tory, right? You know, and they march lockstep with their premier because, as the late great Brian Mulroney said, you dance with the guy that brought you. You dance with the guy that brought you. You know, brung you to the dance.
I'll fix that in post. Don't worry.
Okay, dance with the guy that brung you, Brian Mulroney. He, I don't know whether there's a future for him. He was a smart guy. He was like 23 when he was Bill Davis's principal secretary. Right. And a lot of people thought he had no sense of humor. But on the last day of the conservative rule, under Frank Miller, and of course, whoever suspected, ask Bob Rae, whoever suspected after 43 years, the Tories were going to suddenly lose, okay? On the last day, when the Liberals were taking over, David Peterson had said to him, and he can be a sarcastic SOB, quite frankly, and you have examples on video that I shipped you to take a look at.
Yes, I've seen that. Now, is that audio we should play, or I have that loaded up?
You can do whatever you want with it. If you want to bore people with. Yeah, the premise was all the premiers I covered were asked by the CBC.
Do you want me to play this now, and then we'll finish your thoughts on John Tory? Yeah. I'll play this and then I'll ask you my light
edit it
final
out because we're at 3.5 hours, right?
Yeah, well, I don't want you to miss your dentist.
So the last day of the Tory regime before the Liberals came into power, remembering that David Peterson had said, John Tory, he's just the head waiter for Bill Davis. Tory came in a tuxedo, white cotton gloves, and a silver tray. And he marched into the last Tory cabinet meeting before the change in government. And I thought, boy, that was funny. That was interesting, and it showed he had a sense of humor, and he was a good administrator. But I don't know, a comeback for John. After that incident, I don't know. It's a tragedy.
But never say never. Never say never.
No,
here's what we're going to do. I've decided to call in an audible here in the line of scrimmage here. We're going to do the outro here, and then I'm going to play in its entirety that audio you sent me. So it'll be at the end of our outro here. But the question I want to ask you on the way out here is, your name is Robert Fisher, and you live on a lake, and I need to know, do you fish in that lake? Are you a fisher?
I'm not a fisher.
You don't murder fish.
I don't murder fish. I don't shoot deer. I don't shoot beaver. I don't shoot any animals. I did once ask a neighbor, so you shot this big coyote. Can you eat coyote? He was not impressed.
They shoot coyote where you live?
Well, yeah, you see, you trap the beaver, hang him from a tree,
Oh my
attract the coyote to kill the coyote because you want to kill the deer. I can't eat venison, and it's not the Bambi thing. I just can't do it.
I've never had venison, but I don't think it's an ethical thing necessarily.
No.
I've just never been anywhere where they would serve venison.
At any rate, from first job in Oakville to talk about venison, it's been an extraordinary pleasure, and I so deeply appreciate the opportunity to clear the air, to say things I've never had a chance to say. And my lawyer, by the way, is listening, so in case there's anything that might be controversial.
Well, listen, the pleasure is all mine. This was fantastic. Great respect for you, the body of your work, that timbre in the voice. I got to hear it in the headphones here for the last 90 plus minutes. And, again, it took a few times to make this happen, but I'm glad we did. And this was fantastic.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you coming in here. And I love the fact that you're dressed all serious, but there was levity, there was fun stories. You dropped an F-bomb. You couldn't do that on CBC, could you?
No.
That was great fun. So, Robert, thanks so much for doing this.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
And that brings us to the end of our 1,523rd show. Remember, I'm going to fade down this great song from Lowest of the Low, and I'm going to play this audio that Robert shared with me, and you're going to hear that at the end. If you're looking for me on the social media channels, I'm on most of them as Toronto Mike, but you can go to torontomike.com for all your Toronto Mike needs. Much love to all who made this possible. Again, that's Great Lakes Brewery. Robert's got his beer. Palma Pasta. He can't eat it, I learned, and he can't drink the beer, but people around him will enjoy these treats. RecycleMyElectronics.ca. If you have old electronics, old devices, don't throw those cables and the electronics and tech in the garbage. Those chemicals end up in our landfill. Go to recyclemyelectronics.ca, put in your postal code, and you'll find a place to drop them off to be properly recycled. That's your other homework. The Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team. Again, I'm there August 4th. Go Leafs go. And Ridley Funeral Home. Don't forget your measuring tape. I will see you all Friday when I've got a country music group in the basement. I don't know how I'm going to fit all three guys in here, but the Washboard Union. 3 gentlemen from the Washboard Union will be here, and yeehaw! It's going to be a lot of fun. See you all then.
For who?
Robert Fisher
Excuse me?
from TV.
Like, is that regular TV or is that one of these obscure reality shows? Like, is he one of these pervert kind of guys that they do reality shows about?
Robert Fisher. Was he in the automotive business? Body by Fisher? Is that who you're talking about?
I don't think so. No.
I knew Doug Fisher. There was a men's store in Ottawa called Fisher's. I don't know Robert Fisher.
Fisher. Robert Fisher? Okay, let me just give me a second. Let me just get Robert Fisher. Okay, I think I remember who you're talking about.
A broadcaster in Windsor.
I've got to say I was deeply honored, if not a little perplexed, when they asked me to say something on the occasion of your retirement. Talk about a career. Talk about achievement. You, sir, are a legend. Your powers of analysis and your strategic thinking are simply beyond compare. For me, the highlight of your career was when you beat that guy, Boris Spassky. I told myself then and there will never be a more skilled chess grandmaster than Bobby Fischer.
Wrong Fisher.
What?
This is about Robert Fisher,
Robert Fischer?
the CBC guy.
The CBC guy. Why would I ever want to do a video for Robert Fisher?
And I'll tell you one of the things I'm going to miss about you. I think you have a wonderful sense of humor. I enjoy you on the radio. You look better on the radio than you do on TV, actually. But you have a wonderful, bantering sense of humor that frequently lightens up my afternoons when I have nothing better to do.
I think an approach that was somewhat different than some of the others in the gallery, and one where he appeared to me to be a more sensitive individual. Now, that may not be fair to some of the others, but I always found Robert to be, in my view, a very sensitive member of that profession.
You'd be a natural as a barbecue chef. It seems to me that if you think about it, you've always found great joy in skewering me, holding my feet to the fire, and raking me over the coals.
You know, Robert Fisher, CBC News, Robert Fisher, Global News, so kind of official that he scared the hell out of people. I think people would buy from him just to kind of get him back off the doorstep a little bit.
Probably could be good at lots of things. Fishing comes to mind. Much more relaxing. I was going to say they don't bite back, but maybe they do on some occasions.
Well, I think Robert would make a terrific political advisor, sort of an eminence grise to tell any young politicians as they're coming up what the pitfalls are from the outside, through the eye of a journalist. I think that would be a gift to a rising young star.
What do you think the likelihood of that happening is?
I think the likelihood of that is 0 to none.
His hair is perfect. He's always well dressed. You know, I mean, it looks more like an investment banker than a journalist. And, you know, for all those journalists in the audience there today, take a look around at yourself. You don't look like you belong in the banking world. Robert does.
You know, there's probably some radio station in Minden or somewhere that could use his talents. I don't know, Wingham. I've been in every small town in Ontario. I'm not sure I know exactly off the top of my head where he fits, but probably the smaller the town, the better.